Hello and welcome to a brand new, never before listened to episode of Saved by the 90s. My name's Adam Patterson, and with me today is the guy who counts every viewing of Showgirls as a first-time watch, Mr. Ken Bakley. Hey, Ken.
You know, with a Verhoeven movie, there's just so much happening in it that you just gotta, really just keep every time is like a first-time watch with a Paul Verhoeven movie.
Completely agree. This month on the show, we'll be talking about 4 June titles, which will be first-time watches for both of us. So it's a bit of a grab bag, but I'm sure we're going to find all kinds of fun connections. So let's jump back in time and have some new experiences, because this is Saved by the 90s.
Attention! Your gym teacher escaped from charm school, irons his underwear, watches hygiene films. He says, anyone chewing bubble tape owes me 50 push-ups. The lunch lady wears a hairnet, serves mashed potatoes with an ice cream scoop, puts gravy on everything. She says,
bubble tape is not part of a well-balanced diet.
Bubble tape, it's 6 feet of bubble gum for you, not them.
Every first ad on an episode is always a complete surprise.
Bubble tape.
Bubble tape. Our first title this month comes to us from the multi-talented Frank Oz in his follow-up to another film we discussed on the show, What About Bob? Released on June 12th, 1992, this is Housesitter.
She came.
What are you doing here?
She saw.
My parents think we're married?
She moved in.
I want this marriage to work.
What marriage?
Steve Martin, Goldie Hawn.
No.
Housesitter, rated PG. Starts Friday, June 12th.
After building his dream house, architect Newton Davis proposes marriage to his girlfriend, only to be summarily rejected. He seeks solace in a one-night stand with a waitress, never imagining that a woman he slept with once would end up posing as his wife. Gwen's ruse is so effective that by the time Newton learns of his marriage, quote-unquote, the entire town feels like they know him. All right.
Is that what this movie's about?
The entire
these plot summaries.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
Let's back up. The entire town feels like they know him. They should, because that's where he grew up. That's where he grew up. It's a small town, and everybody already does know him. His parents live there. So why wouldn't they know him? Anyway.
The thing I think about with a lot of these plot summaries, like the IMDb ones too, is that for a lot of older movies, they were written by one person like 22 years ago, and no one has bothered to think up a better one since.
Like who's behind this? It's just, I don't know.
And I think even more so, who is really pushing for the continued preservation of information about Frank Oz's 1992 Martin and Hahn film Housesitter.
You know, it's funny. I was thinking about, for whatever reason, Little Shop of Horrors entered my mind today, and I love Little Shop of Horrors. It's one of the very few musicals that I truly love, and I think the Steve Martin connection, that's probably what made it pop into my head. But
it's also a Frank Oz.
Well, that's what I was getting at. I was like, as I was thinking about Little Shop of Horrors and reminiscing about it, I'm like, who directed that? I can't remember who directed Little Shop of Horrors, and then it like suddenly dawned on me, like, oh, it's Frank Oz. What a great movie. Anyway, let's talk about Housesitter, though. What did you think? What were your initial impressions of this wacky rom-com?
You know, despite the vaguely negative comments I made in previous moments, I didn't hate it. It was fine. It doesn't feel like it's using either of its stars to their full ability, but for what it does do, it kind of lets them do their thing, and it's just mostly, it's pretty sturdy, I guess, but it's never great.
I feel like it does carry the same DNA that a lot of these kind of mid-90s, or just 90s rather, romantic comedies have, where they're fairly inoffensive in most ways. They're fairly forgettable. They're kind of bland. And to me, like, this one, yeah, maybe it was slightly charming at times, but it didn't really have any kind of lasting power for me, and I didn't find it funny at all. Like, I don't think I laughed a single time during this movie. I was entertained by it, to be clear. Yeah. I enjoyed it for the most part, but Like, I wasn't rolling on the floor just losing my S over this movie at all.
No, it really doesn't like take off as much as it just kind of rolls along and then eventually wraps up. Like, that was the weird thing about watching it, is I kept, watching it thinking, wow, it's like this is taking a really long time to like get going into like it's like the rhythm of like the bulk of what you'd think the movie is. And then I checked the time and there was like 30 minutes left in it. And it's like, oh, it just keeps revving. I mean, it's got a good cast to like just kind of riff on for a while. Just, I mean, they're having a good time riffing, but it feels like they never get to really like go for like some like bigger material.
No, so you have, Steve Martin in his pretty typical Steve Martin role here, and then you have Goldie Hawn as this very charming, very crafty con artist, and she sort of just kind of weasels her way into his house through a series of events that, I mean, the funny thing is she basically just moves into his house, and then that's just, they just kind of go off of that. And the bulk of the movie is just the two of them perpetuating this lie. So she initially thought that it would be, I don't know what her end game was here. Like where did she see this going? She knew that the house was vacant, but like, how long did she think that she'd be able to live there without, like, she didn't have a job, she had no source of income, and did she actually think that he wouldn't find out? I mean, what was the goal here?
I mean, that almost seems roughly, I don't know, secondary to it. Like, it's just about this point where she takes the initiative, he gets there, and figures it out what's going on, and they both get to a point where they're just kind of going along because there's really nothing much else they could do by that point. So yeah, the movie doesn't really take much time to like set up any particular contrivance that would set it in motion, but at the same time, perhaps it's just all part and parcel of this character, where the whole thing about her is that she like is like she builds all of her interactions with him on like a series of deceptions, and he kind of has to catch up and like get on her level, I guess.
So people start recognizing her and talking to her around town, and she starts telling people that she's actually his new wife, or his wife rather. And when he finally comes, he decides that he wants to sell the house, finally get rid of it and move on with his life. And he discovers her living there, and then he realizes that she's been telling people that it's his wife, and he decides to go along with it because he looks at it as a way to get his girlfriend back. And I'm not really sure how he thinks that this scheme is going to work. And also, like, do you really, is that how you want to do it? You want to rekindle this romance based around this like really horrible deception? Like, it just doesn't seem like a very good idea from the onset. But of course, we all know where this is going to go. It's
absolutely.
It is abundantly clear that from the beginning that Goldie Hawn's character Gwen she's the one. She's the actual one that he wants, because she's kooky, and she complements his personality just perfectly. And guess what? They get together at the end.
That's what we've been waiting for.
I just let it sort of wash over me, and I thought that Steve Martin was good in it. I thought Goldie Hawn was good in it, and it's funny. Like, I'm going to say this exact same thing regarding another actor in our next movie, but when I see Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn in this movie, I feel like they've aged really well. Like, Steve Martin looks the exact same. Like,
he really does.
He hasn't aged a day since this movie came out, and Goldie Hawn also looks really great now too. I remember my dad used to always say that Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell always looked dirty. He would always say, like, he'd always compliment them on being a great Hollywood couple, but he said that he always felt like they looked dirty, like they unwashed.
I'd never really considered that.
Neither did I, but my dad did for whatever reason. We talk about Hollywood couples. You rarely, I mean, maybe this is an incorrect statement, but I feel like it's rarely talked about the Goldie Hawn Kurt Russell relationship, because that's a really great one that has worked over the years.
For well over 30, possibly close to 40 years at this point, I think.
It's telling that I have nothing to say about this movie because I'm like
we're talking about many peripheral subjects. We're talking about the people in the movie. We're not talking about them in this movie. I'm reading some other interesting trivia. The house that was built for the film won the House Beautiful American Wood Council Award for Best Small House of 1990.
Well, how about that?
It's an interesting looking house.
I was not impressed with the house, to be honest with you.
I don't think I liked it, but I was undoubtedly interested by it. I mean, there's a lot going on with that house.
Yeah, it was weird looking. I didn't like it. It was very there was no symmetry to it. It looked very unsymmetrical, and
it felt like it was combining styles.
Yeah, because there was like that middle part that was like all glass. It had like the glass front part, and then like
it feels like the entrance to like a commercial building or something.
Yeah, and then like the right side almost had this kind of colonial style to it. I was just not impressed, and the inside didn't really wow me either. And I know that it was supposed to be this like really great house.
And then there's the other that has kind of almost feels like open plan with the living room and the kitchen, if I'm recalling.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little busy. It's a little busy just to look at.
I was impressed that he was able to tie a gigantic ribbon around the whole house.
Yeah, that's some ribbon.
And then leave the ribbon. I mean, it was like in disarray, the ribbon, after 4 months, but it was still there. The fact that the ribbon was still there after 4 months, I thought was pretty impressive.
The ribbon is arguably sturdier than the script is here at times.
Yeah, the ribbon is a representation of their relationship, and it was just falling apart.
Who are we to disagree with the rulings of the American Wood Council's Best Small House jury of 1990?
Was it that small? Like, I'm wondering.
1,800 square feet, apparently.
1,800 square feet.
It's like, well, looking at that house, like you said, it would be like hard to quantify the size of it just because it's so asymmetrical.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there was only, I don't remember how many bedrooms there were.
3 bedrooms, apparently.
3 bedrooms. Okay. I mean, 1,800 is not huge, but I don't know if I'd qualify it as small either.
I suppose it just falls under whatever their definition of what falls in the small house category is. Like at the Oscars, how a short film is like 40 minutes or something. Maybe it's on the larger side of small. Maybe it's like a short film that runs 39 minutes and 45 seconds. Now we're talking about now we're trying to figure out the 1990 criteria for the American Wood Council House Awards, rather than talking about the substance of the movie Housesitter, which is fine. There's just not a lot to talk about in it.
No, I mean, I think if there's one thing that I've learned from this month's movies is that there was a reason that I haven't already watched these movies. Like, there's just for one reason or another that Housesitter never really appealed to me, and after watching it, I'm just like, well, it's not like I really feel I've been missing out all of these years in not watching Housesitter. Like, you look at that cover and you know exactly what you're gonna get. Like, there's so many movies.
Which is a movie that's just fine, but just not remarkable, especially considering the stars.
And the director. I mean, you look at...
And Frank Oz.
You look at Frank Oz. I mean, this is like Dark Crystal, Little Shop of Horrors, What About Bob? All of these kind of unique movies in their own way. And then you have something as unremarkable as Housesitter. When you... Even in Frank Oz's lesser films... There's something with them, you know. There's something interesting. There's like some kind of hook to them that makes them unique in some way or another.
You want some more trivia about this house?
Sure, yeah. Hit me.
According to this 1992 article from July of '92, the plans for the house were published through the Princeton Plans Press, and as of the writing of the publication of this article on July 5th, 1992. Some 60 homes were built or in some stage of construction in 25 states using these plans. So at one point, across the country, there were at least 60 houses that were that looked like the one in Housesitter.
So I'm assuming that the house came first. Like
Yes, the house came
they
first.
found the house and they were like, this is the perfect house to use for our movie, right? It wasn't like this house was designed specifically for Housesitter.
The wording of it initially was strange. I'm not exactly sure.
Because that would be a really interesting byproduct, that the house from Housesitter ended up like being this big design thing and spawned all of these other duplicate houses, and it turned into like this whole thing.
Yes, the house did exist, and then the production designer for the film felt that it was exactly what they were looking for. So then they went with that for
Okay, all right.
either the photography or at least the replicas or like the standing sets or whatever.
It would just be so funny if Housesitter was the one.
They built this house. They designed this house for this movie, hired like an architecture firm, and then the house actually became very well received within the architectural community.
And duplicated, apparently.
Yes, and it was popular enough to be duplicated at least 60 times.
I'm surprised that someone hasn't yet built the Parasite house. Because if any house deserves to be built, it's the Parasite house.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's a house I could live in. Oh.
Yes.
Switching gears a bit, our next film is described as the most passionately read love story of our time, according to the trailers.
What does that mean?
I don't know. So
how do you passionately read something?
So let's see if that is true. Directed by Clint Eastwood and released on June 2nd, 1995, this is The Bridges of Madison County.
From the most passionately read love story of our time. Clint Eastwood, Meryl Streep.
Come away with me.
The Bridges of Madison County.
Sneak preview Saturday, May 27th. Check newspapers for showtimes.
Photographer Robert Kincaid wanders into the life of housewife Francesca Johnson for 4 days in the 1960s. I will say, I don't know if that specific cue in the trailer was actually a piece of music in the score, but it sounded enough like it. Like, so I have a particular weakness for like very like earnest but not overdone scoring and like sunlight streaming through the window cinematography. So I was basically with this from like second one and was with it the entire time. But Adam, what did you think?
I thought it was fine. I knew, obviously I've known about this movie forever, and it never appealed to me on any level. So it's one that I've sort of actively avoided of these years. And after finally visiting it, I gotta say, I enjoyed myself. I thought it was a fairly well made movie, except I did have some nitpicks. I had some qualms with this movie. I think the first big thing is the casting of Clint Eastwood. I think it was a big mistake for him to cast himself in this movie. I read that Robert Redford was originally going to be the Kincaid character, and like I just can't. I'm just thinking about what a different movie it would be if Robert Redford was in that role, and I think that this movie was very well regarded. It was critically acclaimed. It was nominated for a bunch of awards and stuff, but I feel like if Redford was in that role, it just would have knocked it out of the park probably. So I feel like Clint Eastwood was miscast because I just couldn't get on board with his character most of the time. It's definitely an
against type role. I thought he was fine.
I thought that he was fine most of the time, except for during the more like quote unquote passionate scenes. I felt like that seemed very awkward to me, and I felt very uncomfortable watching Clint Eastwood making out with Meryl Streep. It seemed icky.
It's not something you ever thought you were going to see in a movie. It just doesn't make sense as a casting of those two as romantic leads.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with like Clint Eastwood's look or anything like that. It has more to do with just his like gruff stoicism. And when you see a character like, we're so used to seeing Clint Eastwood as this like like grumpy kind of action guy or whatever, but like to see him in this kind of passionate role, like tenderly stroking Meryl Streep's hair, and like I just couldn't get on board with it. Like I just couldn't buy what Mr. Eastwood was trying to sell me.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think I was enough on board with this from the start that I was willing. Like, it almost does require, like, almost a suspension of disbelief for someone whose public persona and his film persona has long just so been a particular way. But I was able to make that because I think he was there with the capability to bring it. I do agree that he is probably not the most logical or the best casting decision for that role, but for what he can do and for what he does bring, I was mostly fine with him.
Yeah, like I said, more of a nitpick than anything. And then like also watching this now for the first time, we have had many Clint Eastwood movies since then, and we are fully aware of his shenanigans, you know, off screen. And so the only thing I could think of in this was like him being this kind of grumpy old racist, you know, yelling at people to get off his lawn. You know, like that's all I could think about. Or him talking to the empty chair, like that whole thing. I just kept thinking about that over and over again throughout this movie. So I think maybe if I had like seen this back in 1995, I would maybe have a different feelings about Clint Eastwood in this role.
I didn't really have the same problem that you had. I was just kind of like, because it felt like the movie was just generally internally cohesive in such a sense that it really did feel like everything and everyone was kind of like working together in like the creation of this world, that I was just kind of like, I think it's just the virtue that I was there kind of with it from the beginning, and it never does anything to like stave you off or like suddenly jerk you in a different direction. Like it keeps a very smooth like sense of pace and placement and just emotional core throughout the entire thing. Meryl Streep is of course fantastic in it. I think this is like, I think we get to a point with like talking about Meryl Streep where like her status as like this, you know, canonical great actress of American film, it's like almost something we take for granted. But you watch a performance like her, like the one she gives in this one, and you remember why she has that reputation. Like, you know of her greatness as an actress, you see it, but you almost like, of course, this is another Meryl Streep performance in, you know, 2020. She's going to be good. But you watch this, and it's like, yes, she is doing something with this character, and like she has this this ability to like completely fall into her roles, or even on a technical level to adapt an accent and just adopt an accent, and just completely be there and like feel so present and just like there in every moment with like this like note perfect ability to move between moment to moment that you're just completely just blown away by.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree. I think that she makes this movie. It's, as you said, I mean, she's, I think, one of the greatest actresses of all time. And seeing her in this role, it's really a testament to her abilities. And I mean, we've seen it over and over and over again. Like pretty much every role she's in, she just completely just dominates whatever character she's portraying. She just blends into that character, and I think that that's one of her greatest strengths, is that she is so seamlessly able to completely envelop whatever role that she's given. And in this film, Francesca, she's this Italian immigrant who is living on this farm, and she's not entirely happy with her life. She's kind of has some regrets, and she falls in love with this photographer, but every scene she just commands, every scene that she's in, and she has like even the smallest like little kind of mannerisms that she has and glances that she'll give. She's just so fully committed, and It's really incredible. It's just really incredible. She was nominated for an Academy Award for this, but she didn't win, unfortunately. But she's the reason that you should watch this movie, I think. I think everything else to me is kind of like tertiary. Like even the love story itself, I was not 100% on board with, but for her alone, I would recommend this movie.
Yeah, when I say that we take like Meryl Streep's like status for granted, what I mean is like we just like you see like you were always expecting to go into a movie that Meryl Streep is in and expect her to give like a very good performance. But it's like it takes like one of like her like best roles to like say this is among the greatest performance given by this very great and acclaimed actress, and how that even just continues to go a level above every other movie where she's like, you know, completely committed to the part. And just like it is such a character that could have been, I don't know, it feels like a character that could have been like a blank slate, especially when you consider that the movie is technically told in a framing device. So it's all of the Meryl Streep character's children discovering
Her
the
journals.
existence of this affair.
Yeah.
Yes, after the character's death, and they're going through her belongings. It feels like something that could have just been used as such like a character that just is kind of just projecting what the movie is telling us, or what the movie through kind of secondarily delivered information. But her presence and just her ability to convey and build this character through, as you said, even the smallest mannerisms is really just what brings it so much above even the very respectable baseline level that it was working at. And for me, made it something that was like really great and something that really moved me. I think, like I said, the technical credits are really great. I think Jack Green's cinematography is just gorgeous. And, you know, there are all sorts of other, they're just really great individual moments like that kind of, I don't know, I guess if you're going to mention one scene from this movie, you'll probably mention that scene, you know, later on when her husband comes back and they're, you know, driving their car through in the rain, and like in the car in front of them at a traffic stop is the Clint Eastwood character's car. And they're at the stop, and Eastwood's character stops his car and like keeps it stopped because he knows that she's behind him, like even at this like light that's gone green. And there's this moment, that kind of that focal point where she like has her hand on like the car door handle, thinking about the possibility, even that she has, maybe if she wasn't even considering doing it, just this possibility that she has the agency at this moment to go and to like leave this car and join and get into his car, even if she couldn't actually do it. Just that idea that possibility was so physically close, and how one, that scene is so beautifully shot with just every individual shot in it, and two, how like terrific Streep's just nonverbal performances in there. I mean, those are the kinds of moments in this movie that really, really did like win me over.
There are no doubt a few like truly kind of memorable, beautiful moments in this movie. One of the things that I was worried about was like having her be this woman who's sort of a pushover, where she just sort of accepts the status quo and is in this marriage that it's not a loveless marriage, but she has always been making concessions. She's never done anything for herself. And I think that the fact that they did so much in this story to highlight her as an individual and make sure that we know that there's something more there than her just being a housewife. And I was a little concerned that the emphasis would be put more so on Clint Eastwood's character, but that's not really the case. I mean, he kind of comes in and sweeps her off her feet, but I think that the focus is still primarily on Meryl Streep's character, and I think that helped benefit the overall story quite a bit.
Yeah, it's just about like being able to convey so much about this character just non-verbally, or just through what information that the movie or Streep, or, you know, both really are focusing on in what we do know. that it kind of rises above maybe like the more obvious elements of the plot, or just the less developed, and I think just is just what keeps it there on like the really the core of it, like it that really kind of helps it overcome perhaps the moments where it isn't as thoughtful or well developed or as engaging, and the kind of moments that a worse version of this movie would have gotten stuck in.
I do know that this is based on a novel, so I think that a lot of people I've read online, a lot of people say like the kind of more cheesy or overly sentimental moments are taken from the book and can be sort of blamed. The book can sort of be blamed on those aspects. Now, obviously, I've not read the book, so I can't attest to that. One of the other kind of nitpicks I had is I didn't particularly like the framing device. I just wasn't a big fan of that. Like, thinking about the fact that this brother and sister are sitting there like reading these long journal, like it was like what, like 4 or 5 volumes of this journal. It was a very, very long, very lengthy journal, and I'm just imagining them like sitting there reading it out loud to each other, and thinking like, I don't know if that would necessarily happen that way, if that would really work. And then also like I'd commented to you offline, like the fact that she gets into pretty great detail about how like she's in bed with this guy who's not her husband, and the sort of passionate nights that they've had together. And I'm just like, I don't know if that character, I just can't imagine that the character Francesca would be writing out, you know, what these sequences, you know what I mean?
But I mean, as she says, I believe, I can't quite recall the exact line, but as she says, like in the beginning, and like the beginning of the journal entry, like she's writing these when she's older, and she knows they're not going to be read until after she dies, and she feels like at that point in her life, the most important thing is to be known by the people who were important to you, and I think like that sense of disclosure and honesty about this thing that she would have never told them during her life, and the fact that the only time she can really disclose it is after her death, makes me understand why you would have hypothetically a journal entry that is in such excessive moment to moment detail. I don't know. That didn't really strike me as unusual or hard to believe in the context of the story. Like that wasn't something I got hung up on. Like, it creates like I do agree, it creates an awkward image of having her children have to read it, but like it didn't strike me as something that she just wouldn't be comfortable, just the act of somehow writing it out in general would be something that you wouldn't do.
I guess that does make sense. Otherwise, yeah, I thought it was very well made. And I enjoyed it overall. Again, it's not really my cup of tea. I wasn't really taken with the sort of whirlwind romance that these two had. I thought that the funny thing is, like, normally with movies like this, I find it to be like wholly unbelievable that, you know, these two characters could have this like profound connection in this short amount of time and feel that strong of an emotional bond with each other in just, you know, a few moments. However, in this movie, like, I felt it. Like I believed it, I felt it, and I was in it, and I think that that's something that is sort of rare with movies that deal with these kind of whirlwind romances.
I think it's because, like, for some movies will really try and like play up the fantastical element of it, and so you spend a lot of time thinking about like what the movie is trying, like how much the movie is trying to sell you on the idea, and therefore you have trouble accepting it. But I think that the thing about this movie that really makes it work is that it's not presented as like this incredible thing that you really have to focus all your attention on. It's just like a matter of fact that this is happening, that they are there, and that they are with it, and that they are in this moment, and you're with them in this moment, even in the context of establishing it as a framing device, but you're with it in this moment, and you are just there to be placed in the context of taking in this story.
Yeah, and it's also it's very grounded and it's very understated too. It's not like there's these like crazy grandiose set pieces, and there's an ample amount of time with the two of them like sort of getting to know each other and stuff before the real like romance hits. So I feel like that there's a decent enough build up to the moment, like when they first kiss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I was on board with the romance itself. I didn't find it to be too trite. That's really it. That's all I have to say about Bridges of Madison County. I don't think I'll ever watch it again, but it's still worth a look.
I was very taken by it. I recommend it a lot more strongly, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I would recommend it, but for me, it'd probably be like a light recommend.
Mm-hmm. It's a very strong recommend for me. Go see the Bridges of Madison County. I mean, go see it. Like, one, that it's a new movie, and two, even if it was, you could go anywhere and see movies right now. Rent the Bridges of Madison County on iTunes.
Check your local listings.
Yeah.
Could it mean play is preferred over work?
Very good, Einstein. That's why we created a new music club called Play from Columbia House. No work, no reply cards, no unwanted CDs. Hey, get 12 CDs when you join. Watch for our special mailer. Play. It's easy. Otherwise, we'd call it work.
Now we do back rub versus root canal.
There's so much 90s sarcasm just in that, like, brief narration.
I picked it for the 90s attitude because there was a decent amount of tude in there, and
extremely tude,
and
extreme amount of tude.
And it was about Columbia House, which I feel like we could just do a whole segment on the show dedicated to Columbia House. Are you familiar with Columbia House?
On like a conceptual level and little else.
My family had a Columbia House membership, and it was just a music catalog. Like you would pick out CDs every month, and they would just send you CDs every month, and that's pretty much it. And I guess you got them. I mean, it was like you paid some kind of membership fee, and then you got the music discounted because of that. I don't know.
Apparently, it looks like the Columbia House brand still exists, but it's movies now. It's DVDs. Not quite sure how the system works now.
I love how they pivoted from CDs to DVDs.
They're I mean, they're on the bleeding edge of the year 1999.
It's like pivoting from newspapers to magazines.
Yes. Hey, you know, you're not going to be prepared when in 25 years they start doing Blu-rays, I guess. Our next feature star is Parker Posey, an icon of the mid-90s New York indie film movement. Directed by Daisy von Scherler-Meyer and released on June 9th, 1995, this is Party Girl.
Life goes by so fast. What's the point?
What do you want me to do, huh? I don't have a job. I'm a loser. Shoot me.
Excuse me, can I get a falafel with hot sauce, a side order of baba ganoush, and a seltzer, please?
You want Lebanese delight?
Marry their jeans.
Vogue magazine calls Parker Posey wickedly funny. She's got a personality like a neon exclamation point. First Look Pictures proudly presents...
Sometimes you can be kind of goofy.
Parker Posey.
She's good.
You've outdone yourself.
So silly.
The party is just beginning.
Party Girl.
Hello.
I think one of my main anxieties in life is that I'll probably, not one for some time, if ever, be in a position where someone describes me as having the personality of a neon exclamation point.
What the hell is that? Neon exclamation point. I also
really
love
gutted.
I'm about to read the synopsis, and I got to say that I feel like the synopsis has way more to say than the movie actually did. But let's
one of those.
Let's go for it here. Although Mary has little income, she still finds ways to spend her nights at clubs. After being arrested for throwing an illegal rave, she asks her Aunt Judy for bail money. Judy then finds Mary a job at her library so that Mary can repay her. Initially, Mary finds the job as a clerk boring and stifling, and prefers to get to to know a street food vendor whom she likes. However, Mary must refocus her life once she loses her job and apartment.
That's basically everything that happens up until like the 70-minute mark of this 95-minute movie.
Yeah, I mean, I feel
like that goes way through the midpoint.
Yeah, you don't really need to see the movie actually after reading this.
No, her losing the job in the apartment is literally like the major thing that in the third act.
Yep. Anyway, what did you think of Party Girl?
Well, Parker Posey's good in it. She's a presence. She's there. I'm not going to repeat that completely meaningless platitude about having the personality of the neon exclamation point, because that is literally that's just
it's nothing.
What does that mean? That is a nothing phrase. It's just not like this movie is just not terribly.
It's nothing. This movie is nothing.
It's because there's no cohesion to it.
Nothing happens.
It's not terribly.
It's like it's like, I mean, the tagline is there's a new librarian in town, but like, what does that even mean? What does any of this mean? What is the point of this movie? Why did I watch this movie? Why does it exist is my question. Like, yes, I agree. Parker Posey, she's fine in it. I mean, she's similar to most of her 90s roles. But what is the point of this movie? It's just, it's nothing. There's now, and to be clear, I didn't hate it.
No.
I thought it was fine for this kind of, I'm partial to these 90s New York City indie movies. I enjoy them. And this is definitely one of them, although I would say that this is like certainly a lesser of them. It just doesn't really have anything to say. I think that large portions of it are unfunny when it's desperately trying to be funny, and I think that many scenes are very grating. Like, I found myself being incredibly annoyed by a lot of aspects of this, be it the music. Like, there's certain musical numbers in this, like certain songs that they play, where it's just this like kind of repetitive house music just hammering you over and over and over again. And then there's like certain lines of dialogues that are just repeated over and over and over, and it just drove me crazy at times. I found so much of this to be annoying.
First thing, I actually will basically almost automatically at least partially be on board with any movie that does feature this much house music in its soundtrack. Like, I endorse that. The soundtrack with the house music, yes. Yeah, but it's just not, because it really doesn't get like a sense of like what direction it is supposed to be going down in order to tell the story, because it does have a story it wants to tell. It does want to show character development, but it really never arrives at a point where you're understanding what has changed from scene to scene and when you are along the arc of this narrative. Because there is clearly a narrative here that it wants to you to keep track of, but it doesn't really establish it.
And I think maybe that's the problem. I think that if you look at some of these other 90s indie comedies, a lot of them are just largely plotless. I mean, if you look at Richard Linklater's early films, there's not necessarily a plot. It just sort of follows around these characters for a specified amount of time. And I think that that's what makes those movies, like, Dazed and Confused, that's what makes those movies work, is that it just, you kind of float through these characters' lives in this very specific time period. But with Party Girl, it does have a plot. It does have it's trying to have a narrative structure, but it doesn't work because it feels like it's only pieces of several different plots, and nothing feels cohesive about it at all.
Like, it's a movie that I did desperately want to just because it felt like there was something really interesting here. I mean, if nothing else, for just like you said, I think I also have a certain predisposal towards towards like this particular setting for a movie, this particular time period, but it just doesn't really like, it brings up so much that it never follows through on. It just like has a lot of ideas that it doesn't really shape, like, and it feels like it almost like there's times when it feels like it like brings up and puts away ideas like it's resolved them at some other point. Like it almost feels like a movie that you'd like to find out that like 25 minutes were cut out of for some reason by a distributor, and they just cut out all the connective tissue and just gave you the like the longest scenes. Like there's like another 20 something minutes of this movie that just got cut, but I don't think that's the case.
Nah, I don't think so.
No, it's not the case. It's not. I mean, there's
too much of it is just not developed at all. I mean, like you have this like love story with her and the food cart guy, the falafel guy, and that just doesn't really go anywhere, and it's just so shallow. And yeah, I just, man, and then also like a lot of it was very not great looking visually, and I think that now that's setting aside the fact that the version of this that is currently available is horrific. It's on Amazon Prime, but the aspect ratio is not correct, and it's in standard definition, so it looks like garbage to begin with.
And then upon further investigation, it seemed like the Film Rise, who I guess is the DVD distributor of this movie, currently has it streaming for free on their YouTube account, and also on that it is a standard definition like 4:3, like I think center cut version of the movie. So that just might be the only version that exists in this format.
I think so.
That might be like, which is itself not good.
Yeah,
like,
it kind of sucks.
No.
At least it's not. It's not pan and scan. So
no,
at least we're not dealing with pan and scan, but it's still awful. It's just a bad experience to watch it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like, of course, you're dealing with a '90s Parker Posey movie. You got to have Liev Schreiber in there. Mm-hmm. That's like a prerequisite. But he plays this British guy, and he has this really awful accent.
Oh, there's some choices going on with that accent.
And then there's this scene that happens pretty late in the movie that's like almost this like attempted sexual assault scene that felt very out of left field.
Yeah.
And unnecessary, and just tonally very awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't fit with the movie at all. And but even that was just like it came and it went, and then that was it. Like that was never addressed again.
There's so much to this movie that is just like the beginning of something really like a really interesting and engaging character study, but the movie doesn't really take the time and doesn't have the detail of like giving this character like the space and the room to like be a full-fledged character. Like the character, like the Parker Posey's character never feels like the movie is really giving her like the space to exist.
I did find it to be mostly entertaining, but at the same time, I just don't think I can really recommend Party Girl.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many other movies that came out during this time period that I think encompass this era of filmmaking and do it in such a better way. I mean, from movies like Suburbia to Day Trippers, which is another Parker Posey, Liev Schreiber movie. Like all those movies, I think handle this kind of specific time period. Doom Generation is another one that I really enjoyed. In fact, we could probably do a whole episode on these like 90s indie comedies. We should actually.
No, definitely.
I really love them.
It's another important part of the film history and the film culture of this decade.
As long as Slacker's not on that list, because I hated Slacker. Hated. All right. That's Party Girl.
It's disappointing that it's not there's not really much there, because it feels like there could be.
Our final film this month is another indie featuring Parker Posey, this one directed by Hal Hartley, who would later develop it into a trilogy. Released on June 19th, 1998. Let's discuss Henry Fool. I don't have a clip or a trailer for this one.
An egocentric bum transforms the lives of a shy New Jersey garbage man and his sister. So we're commenting a lot about the quality of like these plot summaries that we find and that we read off for this. For Party Girl, it arguably just told you the whole movie. For this movie, not that creating a short summary of it is in any way an enviable task, but this tells you nothing.
It tells you nothing, but also...
And what it does tell you, it arguably tells you inaccurately.
Yes. I mean, but I also think that it would be difficult to craft a synopsis for Henry Fool.
Yeah.
In general, because it is sort of this sprawling indie comedy, I guess. Comedy ? But because it is so sprawling, it's, I think, would be difficult to sort of pin down exactly what this movie is about. Like, what is this movie about? It just sort of meanders from scene to scene, and yeah, it's like sort of about this guy played by Thomas J. Ryan who comes into their lives and does some stuff and then leaves.
You really got to hand it to Hal Hartley for just creating a movie without sympathetic characters, or remotely sympathetic characters that are averse to being in any way likable.
Yeah.
Or doing one decent human thing the entire time.
I feel like now I did watch the whole trilogy in preparation for this episode, and
I did want to like start off by saying, one, I did not know how to process the information that this is the movie. Before I watched it, was the first of 3. Like, I just did not expect that. I think just because I had in mind this is one of the movies we're talking about this week, and so I didn't know anything about it. So for some reason, I did not expect. And then after watching it, I was really just sort of both baffled by the idea that there are 2 more of these movies, and also like completely thinking, yeah, I can kind of understand like the possibility that Hal Hartley is going to create an entire world out of this. But Adam, yes, please report to us on your Henry Fool cinematic universe experience.
Well, so I think the important thing to note is that these movies are not for everyone. I think that they're probably very polarizing. You're either into this guy's movies or you're not. And I think that when you watch a movie like Henry Fool, you'll understand that Hal Hartley has kind of I would say unique style, in that his scripts are often, I think, could be perceived as pretentious. There's a healthy dose of pretension in his scripts, and I think that's probably very intentional. But also, I don't know if this is like I feel like it must be a directing choice where his dialogue is so like stilted and awkward. And when you watch his movies, they oftentimes come off as being very amateurish, I think. And even when you have actors who, by this point, this came out in 97, and Parker Posey had been acting in many things by this point. When you see her in this movie, you feel like this doesn't feel like a very natural role. Like, the character that she's playing in this feels very much like a Parker Posey character. However, the way that she's delivering her dialogue feels extremely unnatural. And the same can be said about James Urbaniak, who he's also a really great actor, but his dialogue also, everybody's dialogue feels kind of just askew to me.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely feels like a stylistic choice in that sense.
Yeah. And I don't think that's for everyone. I mean, it has a very lo-fi look to it. It has this kind of, looks very indie movie. It just fully encompasses that 90s indie aesthetic. And I kind of love that.
No, yeah. I
the,
mean,
the movie itself, it's too long. First of all, it shouldn't be. It has no right to be 137 minutes. When you have a movie like this that has no discernible plot and it has no discernible structure, even it just sort of goes through the motions. It feels when you have a movie that's long and has that kind of structure, it feels long. Like you feel the length. And, because you don't know where it's going. You don't know where it's going to end. You have no conception of time when you're watching something like this. It's just
you're just kind of floating in its muck.
Yeah. And I also think that the characters have something to do with that too, where, like you said, there's not a single likable character in this movie. They're all fairly awful in their own way. Mm-hmm. So it's not like you can really latch on to any one person throughout their trials and tribulations. So I think a lot of people who attempt to watch this probably end up feeling like, this is not for me. Like this is just not. This is not a movie that's going to gel with me. Now, for me personally, I did enjoy it. I'm glad that I watched the Henry Fool trilogy. Before I continue, how did you feel about Henry Fool?
Well, like I said, you kind of float around in its muck and you don't feel very good when it's over, but you're not supposed to feel very good when it's over. Yeah, I would say that I didn't hate it. I didn't feel like actively against it, but I can also think about, like, if I didn't have to watch this for this podcast, if I wasn't like watching the whole thing, I do wonder if I would have like given it like the whole time. I might have just gone away from it for a very long time. Perhaps maybe I'd come back. I don't know. There is something about Hartley's style where you don't feel like it's, pretentious per se. I didn't feel like it was pretentious per se, because for me, for something to feel like off-putting in that way, it has to feel like it's just being a certain way for very like unclear reasons, where you feel like Hartley has a very well-developed style. Like he knows what he is doing and he has an internal logic that it's all operating by. I can't really comment very much on this because Hartley is one of those filmmakers where I've known of him for a long time, but I know very little or essentially nothing about his work.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really comment. He's like a huge blind spot for me.
There's sort of this aura of self-importance that this movie has. At least that's what I got from it. And I think that's sort of what made me feel like this is a little bit pretentious, where it's a movie that seems like it's trying to be more important and it's trying to say more than it actually is. But again, that is sort of the design. It's sort of by design. I mean, the character of Henry Fool, I mean, that's sort of his MO. He's this sort of rogue philosopher criminal who comes into the lives of these siblings and upends their whole lives and causes a lot of turmoil within their lives, and continues throughout 2 more movies.
There are really 2 more movies. Like, you almost admire that. Like that this is the one that really got that, that this is the movie that spawned 2 more movies to further develop its world.
It's very strange. So just to give you a really brief summary here, in the first Henry Fool movie, as we said in the synopsis and we spoke about, this character just sort of he just sort of strolls into town, and he convinces the garbage man character, James Urbaniak, that he needs to write poetry. And so he writes this like very long book that is just, I think it's just 1 poem, but it's like an entire novel. But we don't get to hear really any of it. We know that it offends a lot of people. It's apparently very controversial and it's very explicit. And it later turns out that Henry is on parole. He was released from prison. He served 7 years in prison, I believe, for statutory rape. And he ends up killing someone. There's a character played by Kevin Corrigan who was abusing his spouse, and an altercation happens near the end of the film, and Henry ends up killing the guy, and he flees. He through the help of James Urbaniak, he flees the country, and that's sort of how the movie ends. At one point, James Urbaniak and Parker Posey's character's mother ends up reading the poem, and she kills herself. Which is...
That happens too.
Yeah, very shocking scene. Also, Henry Fool at one point has sex with the mother, and then also has sex with Parker Posey, the daughter. So that also happens. There's also a diarrhea scene in it too, and a vomiting scene.
There is.
So a lot of bodily functions going on in this movie. A really intense diarrhea scene, not unlike the scene from Dumb and Dumber, the Jeff Daniels scene in Dumb and Dumber.
It is endless.
Intense diarrhea scene.
Endless. It is at least, by my estimation, 45 of the 137 minutes in this movie. I mean, there is something to be said, just as a general comment. Like, this is kind of moving away from the movie itself, and just a general comment on just, how a movie uses its time. How this is a movie that is, 137 minutes and is purposely trying to fill them in a way that's discordant. So it feels longer. There's that idea that, there's the criticism of a movie that feels longer than it is. But in this case, perhaps you could criticize it along those lines, and perhaps I might. But it's also a movie that feels like it's trying to feel kind of long and drawn out, just to kind of contribute to that feeling of
listlessness.
Yeah, detachment, and just kind of this off-putting quality in living in this the completely horrible world of this movie.
Mm-hmm. In the second one, so Faye Grimm is the title of the second one, which follows the sister, the Parker Posey character. And at the beginning of the film, no one's heard from Henry. He's gone. They think he's dead, actually. And the James Urbaniak's character is in prison for aiding and abetting him, along with several other charges. So he's in prison, and Faye Grimm is an espionage thriller. It is completely different than the first movie. It is not a comedy. It's not this little New York, New Jersey set indie. It's a lot different. And the basic premise of this one is that Faye Grimm ends up helping the CIA try to track down Henry's confessions. So a big part of the first film was that he was writing this confession, this long sort of book that goes through his whole life. And it turns out that this book that he wrote had code. It was written in code, and it goes through all of the various missions that he was on while working for the CIA. And so it turns into this espionage thriller where Faye Grimm is going all around the world trying to track down these books, because he wrote them in volumes. And so she's going to Paris and Turkey and Afghanistan. She's going all over the place.
You've gotta love it.
And meanwhile, you have Jeff Goldblum is her CIA handler. It's so bizarre. I gotta.
I love that that's what that is.
Yeah, really, just a really strange turn.
I feel the need to briefly note this wildly amusing to me line on the film's Wikipedia page on Faye Grimm. The film was shot almost entirely in Dutch angles, meaning the vast majority of shots are framed diagonally or tilted. At the 2007 Sundance Film Festival, Hartley revealed there are 2 shots in the film's final cut that are not Dutched. and they occurred because he and the film crew forgot to tilt the camera.
It was funny, as I was watching this, my wife was in the room and she commented, she's like, I do not like the way that this movie looks. And I was like, yeah, it's very unsettling, isn't it? It's to see a whole movie in Dutch angle is it's something else. It's something else. It's not very pleasant.
I'm guessing movies almost entirely in Dutch angle are between this one and Battlefield Earth.
It's just everything is off kilter, and it's pretty awkward. But I actually really enjoyed this movie. Mm-hmm. It might be my favorite one out of the three, just because of how ridiculous it is, and to see like Parker Posey jet setting around the world looking for these books and getting into all these crazy hijinks.
Yeah, actually, the funny enough, the observation I was going to make when we were talking about the stilted dialogue of Henry Fool is that it felt like, it had that like off kilter feel, and I kind of like, I don't know, that it felt like, tilted or slanted in a particular way. And lo and behold, the second film is entirely, with the exception of two shots, shot that way.
There you go. Yeah, everything is a little unsettling about his movies. Like everything just never feels quite right. It is a unique thing, I think. But anyway, Faye Grimm, quite a departure from the first one, and I would recommend giving it a look. She ends up helping out a terrorist organization, and she gets charged with treason, and she gets sentenced to life without parole. So she ends up going to prison for the rest of her life. And the third entry, Ned Rifle, follows their son. So you find out in Henry Fool, in Henry Fool, they have a child together. And by the third one, Ned Rifle, he's in witness protection. He turns 18 and he decides that he wants to leave witness protection, and he sets out on a quest to find Henry because he knows Henry's alive and he wants to track down Henry and kill him. Like that's the plot of Ned Rifle. He wants to kill his dad. And if you remember, the reason that Henry was in prison for 7 years is because of statutory rape. Aubrey Plaza plays the girl who he raped when she was 13, I think. And now she's grown and she's looking for Henry as well because she's like obsessed with him. So there's that.
I stopped commenting is that at some point about, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes ago, I completely ran out of things I could ever possibly say.
So there's that.
There's nothing I could possibly add.
Yeah. I enjoyed Ned Rifle too, actually. In fact, I think out of the three, Henry Fool is actually the weakest of them. I think that both Faye Grimm and Ned Rifle, while each having their own sort of quirks and problems, I think that both were way more focused and way more assured than the first one. And I gotta say, like, yeah, overall Ned Rifle I think is worth a look as well. Overall, it's just a weird trilogy.
I kind of got that impression. I mean, there's not much I can add because I don't really know much about it, and I didn't feel like there was anything I could. I was largely left without formative comment, like well-formed comment on Henry Fool. So I just kind of have to. I guess kind of have to let this all be. I guess there's not much I can say.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like it's kind of a story that's stuck with me in the days since
I can't imagine you would view this whole saga and all the places that it goes, and like geographically, at least for the second one, and the time it covers, and not come away with some lasting impact on you. Now that you've told me all of this information and I can slowly try and process it all, the reason that, like, it's just not, like, that was my main problem with Henry Fool, at least, is that it's like, in a world that's so deliberately unpleasant that I just personally can't get in a position where I feel so invested that I have to keep watching. So the likelihood is I probably wouldn't have watched any of these other movies just because I just couldn't. I don't know if I can put myself in that headspace again for something that's deliberately uncomfortable. And I have more than enough to consider just considering all that I've learned about the next two movies. So
yeah, and
there are no words, I guess. And once again, I am left thinking that there's really not much else I could possibly ever say.
It's something. It is a very interesting trilogy.
I do want to also note, as long as we're noting trivia, I do want to note on Ned Rifle's Wikipedia page, this film was largely funded through Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
The $9,000 reward tier was initially the film's distribution rights for 7 years, and then Kickstarter said that is a form of investment, and so that is not allowed. The $9,000 Kickstarter tier for for Ned Rifle was distribution rights.
Yeah, I remember that this was a Kickstarter. I think we even featured it at some point, like on the site ages ago when we did a segment called Kickstart Sunday where we would highlight a new Kickstarter project every week. This was back when like Kickstarter there were like viable, like decent movies being funded on there. I feel like that really that sort of dried up over the years, but this was one that we talked about back then.
According to Variety, someone actually did take the $9,000 tier, but after Kickstarter said that was a form of investment and therefore not allowed, they were refunded.
I am interested in visiting more of Hal Hartley's films. These three are the only ones that I've seen of his, so I do want to check out some of his other movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he seems like a director that I might like. I'm interested by because he's clear that he has a style that is, if nothing else, it's style that is like very singular, very much his own, and very much by this point in his career in 1997, pretty well developed. In that you might not like the style of the movie, and I might, and personally, I wasn't really able to, feel on board with it, but I did recognize it as clearly the work of an artist who is was at a point in his career where he absolutely knew what he was doing, which I think is interesting enough. So maybe I might try and go back and look at other Hal Hartley films, but maybe not in the short term.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I believe that's going to do it for this month. Thank you so much for listening. You let us know some of your biggest 90s blind spots by sending us an email to 90s@filmpulse.com or sending us a message on Twitter or Facebook at 90spod. Until next month, I hope everyone is staying safe, but continuing to speak out against injustice everywhere. For Ken Bakley, my name's Adam Patterson. This has been Saved by the 90s.
Bye, everyone.